Hello. So today we are talking about chapter 8 instead of 7. 7 is very similar to what we talked about in the video in our meeting before the first exam. It's about the overall auditing structure. It's about the auditing equation. It's about how respond to different risks, inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. So after we define everything, right? It's important to carry the procedures out to do auditing work. And if you recall, we mentioned this in today's world as companies get bigger and bigger with more transactions, especially if we think about the big four audit firms. Their clients includes the biggest companies in the world. And those companies have so many transactions every day, not to mention a whole year and global wise. So it is impossible for auditors to really audit everything, all the transactions of a company. For example, some auditors are supposed to audit revenue account, and it's impossible for us to imagine any audit firm could have audited 100% of the revenue items. Same for different expenses, same for most asset items and the liabilities. So what can auditors do, right? We mentioned before that when auditors do their audit, in their audit opinion, they provide limited assurance. What do we mean by limited assurance? So assurance, we also understand. What do we mean by limited? Meaning that it's only on material aspects, right? They don't provide absolute, or we call 100% assurance, because to provide 100% assurance, auditors or anybody who wants to provide 100% assurance about something, you need to look thoroughly 100% of this particular item so you can deliver 100% assurance. And auditors cannot do that for most, if not all, of their clients. And so we are saying that auditors need to only look a small group of whatever the transactions, their accounts they're trying to look at, and they try to draw a conclusion about the big group from the small subset they look at. We call this group population, right? So for example, if an audit firm, an auditor is supposed to audit let's say Walmart's financial statements, right? And when they are auditing revenue accounts, all the revenues, every day, every single transaction, no matter it is just selling a bottle of water or from selling like 100 TVs, those transactions, they are all parts of the revenue transactions, right? So this we call population. All the year, the whole year, all the sales, they are part of the population of revenue transactions. And of course, auditors cannot look at all of it. So auditors need to take a small part out of the population. We call sample, right? So auditors, when they do this, we call sampling. So auditors look at a sample and try to draw a conclusion of the population. Looking at a sample is not a purpose, right? I mean, Walmart has, I guess, millions of transactions every year, and auditors cannot even look at 10,000. So auditors are looking at a very, very small group of the population, and they try. Of course, when you want to address opinion to a big population, such a small sample, there's not too much use to only know the sample. So auditors study the sample in the purpose to understand population and to provide limited assurance about the conformity of the accounts with GAAP, given limited assurance about that. Right? So if we think about it, sampling is important. Right? Whenever auditors have potentially looking at a very big set population, and they cannot look at all of them, or they figure out, right? If we just study how it works and we then look at a small subset, it's going to be more cost efficient. Then auditors do so. They look at a small subset. They do sampling, because compared to do 100% auditing, do sampling saves them time, saves them cost, and could be potentially more efficient and effective. So auditors do this, and whenever they are dealing with a very big population. So when we are talking about sampling, we are not only talking about substantive tests, right? Because we are auditors compare numbers to supporting evidence, for example, like sales revenue to different invoices. When we are talking about internal control, we also mention control, right? For example, all the checks over 50,000 should be signed, approved by manager in addition to cashier. So when we're dealing with a policy like this, we want to make sure to some control tests to make sure this control is really working and people are carrying out, people are respecting the rule. So what do? Right? We take a look at the checks over 50,000 and see whether they are approved by the managers. But if it's such a big company, there are potentially many checks over 50,000 and the population is too big. So auditors might take just a small set of the whole population. They might, for example, there might be 1,000, there might be 2,000 checks over 50,000 and it's too many. So auditors might look at just 100. They draw 100, which is their sample, and they try to understand the overall from what they got by looking at a small sample. They try to draw a conclusion about the population. So of course, we are in an auditing class. We are not a statistics major. But when we are trying to draw a conclusion about a bigger set from a small subset, we're applying statistics. We don't need to design or learn in and out of statistics, but we need to use it, right? We need to understand what it means. So for us our goal is to understand the population, and to achieve the goal, we do this by analyzing the sample. So it is important for the sample to resemble, to look like the population. And how do we assure that? We live in Houston, right? So I don't know how many people still listen to the radio in the morning. Now I don't do much driving in the morning, but when I was, before I had my Amazon, Prime Music, whatever, I used to listen to radio, and there's a rock and roll channel in the morning. They sometimes have ads from Medic Center. They will be recruiting volunteers to test new drugs, right? To recruit people to test new drugs. And usually in the radio, they are very specific. They want people with certain disease, show certain symptoms. They want people to show certain age. Sometimes they want people of certain sex. And they want people to have no other diseases. Those are the different things, right? And why are they doing this? Because for a drug, right, if a drug is aimed to be effective on everybody with certain disease, right? But of course, they cannot test it on everybody, and FDA needs it to be tested before it's released to public. So those companies want to do a small scale test, right? They want to do a sample. They sample some people and try the drug on those people and to see if it works or not. All right, that's a basic rule. Of course, in real world, we usually have placebo group and the medicine group, right? We're gonna skip that a little bit. So when they are recruiting subjects, because they claim the effective population should be the whole group of the people with those diseases. So when the drug companies, they are trying to test the subjects, volunteers, they have to make sure their sample look like group. They cannot eliminate certain age. They cannot tease out certain sex. They cannot tease out certain color, racial background. They need to make sure the sample, they have enough sample, allow them, while they look at the sample, allow them to produce a conclusion which can be used, generalized to the whole population. To do this, they also want to make sure their sample looks a lot like the population, all right? So this is what we have to understand. So how do we achieve that? Usually randomization is the key. Now, when you have a big group of people random, in the case we talked about, right? Because when drug companies, they test their new medicine on test the subjects, they put people into two groups, right? One is a placebo group, and the other is a McCoy group, or we can call that, right? And how do they pick? Because there are so many different features among different human beings, they do not want anybody to apply their subjectivity, right? Their own will. So they do randomization. For example, they recruited 1,000 people. They put them into two groups randomly. This group A, one group B, one group A, one group B, right? By this randomization, when you have a big enough sample, if you do randomization, the two groups will be much alike. And so here's what we have to remember. And we do this when we do sample, it's the same thing, right? We do two things, right? So when we are talking about checks over 50,000, right? We are looking at checks over 50,000. If all the checks look alike, we can randomize. If we determine we have to sample pick 100, then we can randomly draw 100. And in the chapter, we talk about different methods to draw 100. But if there's one thing we have noticed, when we talk about randomization, right? Let me ask you a question. Let's say you are supposed to go to a auditor jewelry store, right? In the jewelry store, they sell two things. One is diamond ring, right? Those big shiny stone, 20,000, 50,000 each. Let's say 30,000 each, right? And the other is surprisingly just copper rings, $15 each, right? So they carry about, it's a rich store, so they carry about 1,000 diamond rings and 100,000 copper rings, okay? So if you are trying to audit rings, right, in your audit inventory, you need to make sure they really have the rings, okay? Are you gonna treat the copper rings and the diamond rings the same? Probably not, right? What you're gonna do about the diamond ring? Diamond ring is much more expensive. Diamond ring is much more likely to be stolen. Diamond ring is much more likely to be robbed, right? Victim of burglary, whatever, breaking, right? On the other hand, copper rings, 15 each, there's probably nobody want to steal it. They are subject to much, much lower risk, right? So in this part, although we are talking about inventory account, we are talking about two very different things among inventory. One is those expensive, subject to much, much higher risk of being the victim of theft, robbery, are different things. And the other is subject to very low risk of those factors, right? So although this time we are talking about auditing this group, right, is inventory other rings. But we have to realize that in this group, there are two categories of subjects. They are subject to very different risks. That's why there are two categories, right? So within each category, items can be viewed as the same, so they can be randomized. But compare those two different groups. They are two different things. We cannot render them. We cannot put them together and randomize it in the pig. So for example, right, we can say that, okay, of all the rings, we're gonna sample 500 out of the diamond ring, and we're gonna sample maybe 100 out of the copper ring, right? That's different strategy, okay? But if you want to audit 700, can you audit 700? Can you say that I'm just going to sample 700 out of other rings? Of course you cannot, because when you are randomly withdrawing, you apply equal chance of being picked as sample to all the rings, right? They all have equal opportunity to be picked if you close your eyes. But we know that diamond rings are subject to much higher risk, are very likely to cause misstatements, bigger misstatements, while copper rings not so much. So diamond rings deserve much higher chance to be picked as sample compared to copper rings, right? If we do not recognize the differences in terms of risk, which result in the difference of items, characteristics when we talk about sampling, then we are basically paying too much attention to those items with low risk and paying not enough attention or not doing enough audit work for those with high risk, right? So if you are working too hard on those non-important things, if you are working, putting too much auditing resource on those with low risk, which means that you're gonna be under auditing those with high risk. Over auditing does nothing, and under auditing will make financial audit opinion to be more likely to be wrong. Subject audit firms to higher risk of their audit opinion being wrong. So we should avoid that, right? Just like we do exam. If you have 30 minutes left after you finish, right, you should apply more time to think about the ones you think that are worth more points, right? Instead of worrying about those ones with 1 point each, right? We should apply our efforts proportionally based on the importance, risk characteristics, risk profiles of the items. And when they have very distinctive risk profile, they are two different items from the perspective of auditing. Okay. So this is what we have today. And we're gonna start chapter 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. After this, gonna more talk about real auditing, and we probably have more more online meetings. Thank you very much. Take care.